Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Hell's Kitchen Land Use Committee, Board 4. We have an important meeting tonight, so thank you all for coming. I have to read this. We've adopted a hybrid meeting policy, as you probably know. So we meet in person, but we do have some people who are going to be online. We have to have a quorum, and we do have a quorum. We have one member who is virtual. That's Chris. We'll introduce ourselves so you know who we are. And we're going to move along as quickly as possible. So we have two important items tonight. One is Hartley City Planning. Welcome. We're going to talk about the Midtown South rezoning for the Hell's Kitchen. And I'll run that through. And then we have our co-chair, Paul and JD. I'm the co-chair with Paul Devlin. That takes the second half. And we'll introduce ourselves so you know who we are.
Hi, I'm Brian Webb, public member.
I'm John Danielle Nolan.
Paul Devlin, co-chair.
Andrew Miller.
And right on time we have.
Introduce yourself, Joe.
And we have a board member. Chris, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Thank you. Christopher LeBron, member of CHKLU committee.
Thank you, Chris. So after the presentation, we'll have some questions, probably a few from the committee, and then maybe folks online will ask questions as well, or in the audience, and then we'll move on. So welcome, everybody. We're going to start the meeting. And part of our city planning, welcome and introduce yourselves and tell us what it is.
No, I probably know Steve. Hi, everybody. I'm Andy Gundu. I'm a senior finance department planning. You all know I'm advisor to see the liaison. Here to present to you an abbreviated version. I'm assuming you have a lot on your agenda tonight. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Midtown South mixed use plan, and mostly focused on preliminary zone engagement process that we just wrapped up last week with our town hall meeting. So just to orient everybody, this is the study area, currently zoned M16 and M16B. So you know what that means in a little bit, but basically at a high level, we're
Just want to let you know your audio is dead at Harris Studios. So for the last minute, nothing has been recorded.
I think we should be back. Chris, can you hear us now?
I can hear you now. There's echo because of the room that you're in. So if you can get as close as possible to the microphone, that would help out.
All right, we're moving the microphone. The microphone. Okay. How's that? Better?
Much better. Thank you. 1 second. Thank you.
Cool. So this is the area we're talking about. We can go to the next page. Next page. Let's get to some of the good parts. So really, the goals of our plan are at a high level to really foster a more vibrant, more 24/7 mixed use neighborhood in what are currently pretty sleepy areas of Midtown South. And the ultimate goals of the study are really three-part. One is to increase opportunities for new housing, specifically affordable housing in particular. Advance economic development goals. We know that this is a really critical jobs generating area of the city. So we want to protect that and enhance that. And then finally, improving the quality of life, improving the streetscapes, improving the experience of pedestrians and people that live and work there. Next. One more. So like I said, we just capped off our pretty extensive, robust 6-month public engagement process. We had a lot going on during that time. We heard a lot from the community. We had a lot of presentations, saw a lot of these folks. And we just had a town hall meeting last week where we basically showcased what we learned from the community and what our initial planning approach is, and previewed our draft zoning approach. So that's where we are basically today. Over the next couple of months, we're going to be refining that draft zoning approach that you're going to see later. That's going to become the basis of a draft plan, which will then become a ULURP application later this year. And that'll be probably later in December. That's when the application will be certified by the City Planning Commission, and that'll start the really formal public review process, which you'll participate in, obviously. Next one. So this is really just a very, very high level distillation of what we heard during the public engagement process, which we summarize in sort of these 6 thematic buckets that sort of rose to the surface. The first one was, we heard a lot about housing. Almost universally, people support housing here. They want to see more affordable housing, both in new construction and especially conversion of existing buildings. We heard a lot from the community, particularly business owners, people who work here, that they want this area to remain a hub of economic activity. They want their businesses to be able to remain and to be able to grow their businesses there. Third, we heard from people who expressed that they were really interested in office and commercial and residential conversions, and really respecting sort of the unique character and architectural heritage of this area. We heard that people wanted a lot more local amenities and retail. We think that just by introducing more housing and more people and more residents, that we can expand the range of services and amenities that are available just because there's more demand. We heard from people that they really wanted us to focus on improving the public realm, those sidewalks and open spaces and parks that are in the area, and making sure that we focus on really improving those connections between the major transit nodes. And then finally, we heard very loud and clear that people were really concerned and focused on public safety and making sure that illegal street activity, other antisocial behavior was addressed, and that we make the neighborhoods safer and welcoming for everybody. Next slide. So I'm going to skip over, actually, can we go to 11? Next slide. I'll hit the high points. So because this area is zone manufacturing, because historically it's been an industrial area, because there is this restrictive zoning, there are relatively few housing units here. So only about 2,300 compared to about 75,000 units within a 10-minute walk. So within about a 10-minute walk or a half-a-mile radius, there's 75,000 units. And in these 4 areas, there are only about 2,300. And there's currently no requirement for income restricted housing. We have the opportunity to do that, allow housing for the first time. We can map mandatory inclusionary housing where that's applicable. And we think this example of the M16D zoning district in the Southwest is really sort of a test case and showing what the pent-up demand for residential development is here. So that area that you see in the southwest, this area was rezoned in 2011 to allow for limited residential development. And in the last 12, 13 years, that area has seen an explosive amount of residential growth. So even though it's only less than 2 blocks large, it contains over a third of the total housing units in the entire study. And it's even produced a couple of hundred affordable units as well. Next slide. I think it just bears mentioning that Midtown South, this area in particular, is a really, really critical reservoir of jobs for the city. And also the region. There are people that commute outside of the city to come here. 135,000 jobs in about 7,650 businesses. That's a comparable employment density as like the core Midtown business district just to the north. But we've seen, over the past decades, a really precipitous decline, particularly in manufacturing, mostly led by a decline in garment production. But those jobs have been replaced, more than replaced, by jobs in office-based jobs. Even fashion-based jobs have been replaced by, not garment production, but fashion merchandising, design, showrooms, things like that. So even though it's not quite the garment district that it was 100 or 50 years ago, there is still a pretty significant fashion presence in the area, especially the Northwest. Jobs have grown in this area faster than in New York City or the US as a whole. But unfortunately, housing production has not kept up with the pace of job growth. So that's all to say that this is a huge, critical economic driver for the city, and we want to keep it that way. Next slide. We can go to the next one. So talking about the building stock for a second. The existing buildings in the plain area really do reflect the history of an industrial area. There are very few undeveloped sites in the plain area, and it's very built out, it's very dense, not a whole lot of opportunity for ground up development. That's why we're looking at conversions as a big opportunity to get a lot of that new housing production. The vast majority of buildings were constructed prior to the current 1961 zoning resolution, and almost half of buildings are larger than what would be allowed under today's zoning rules. So they're overbuilt. Starting in the Northwest, the existing floor area ratio for FAR is about 12.8. That's the median. But we have a huge number of buildings that are in the 15 to 20 range and over. You even have like 30, 35, up to 40 FAR buildings in the Northwest. So really, really significant, huge buildings here. The FARs are comparable in the Northeast, but then generally the southern two areas, the Southwest and the Southeast, are a little bit less dense, and we think that calls out for treating them slightly differently in any proposed zoning approach. Next slide. Let's go to slide 19. So based on all of our analysis, all of our research, everything we heard during the public engagement process, we developed a preliminary zoning approach that you see here. Again, I want to just emphasize that this is a preliminary zoning approach. It's a framework. It is sort of the outer bounds of what we are required to analyze under City Environmental Quality Review, the SEQR process. It is by no means final. I'm sure we're going to hear lots of commentary on this draft proposal, and it's going to be refined
It's going to be put into a ULURP application, which will then be further refined during the formal public review process. So what you're seeing tonight is by no means the last word. So we think that these zoning districts that we propose go a long way towards effectuating a lot of the recommendations that we heard during the public engagement process. So for the northern two sub-districts, we're proposing an M19A R10 district. So these are paired mixed-use zoning districts. They pair a manufacturing district with a residential district, and that allows for the broadest possible range of uses as of right: residential, light manufacturing, commercial, community facility. And we did that because we really don't want to, we want to allow housing, but we also don't want to make any of the existing uses there non-conforming. We want all of the businesses that are currently there to be able to stay there, to be able to grow and sustain that. So an M19A district allows for 15 FAR for non-residential uses. We think this is more than appropriate given the existing build FARs, both in the study area and in the surrounding context. And then across the board, we're proposing an R10, which allows 12 FAR for residential uses with mandatory inclusionary housing. We think that there's the possibility with state action to potentially lift that cap. We'll know more in the next few weeks. If the state were to do that, there's the opportunity to go even higher with residential FARs, but that's still to be determined. And we're also lobbying the state really, really hard to reauthorize tax incentives like 421A, 421G, so that these types of developments and conversions can actually pencil out. So the southern areas, we're proposing an M18A R10, and those districts would allow for 12 FAR for all uses: commercial, light manufacturing, residential, community facility. And so based on our very back of the envelope preliminary analysis, we think that we can get up to about 4,000 new homes through this rezoning in the analysis period, which is about 10 years. So by 2034, we're looking at approximately 4,000 new homes, and between 800 and 1,100 of those potentially could be permanently income restricted. Again, we're advocating really hard at the state level for the state to lift that cap and to reauthorize those tax incentives. MIH would be mapped across basically the entire study area, except for the M16D portion, where because of technicality, it can't be. And then we're also looking to implement some bulk controls that are meant to reflect sort of the loft-like context of the area. So we're looking at rules for street walls, minimum and maximum base heights, things like that. Those are still something we're discussing, something we'd like to hear feedback from you all, but that's high level what we're thinking. Yeah, that's it. We can go to the next slide, next one. Yeah, so I mean, this is basically where we are today. Our draft scope of work for environmental review is being published next Thursday. Yeah, the 19th, I think that's Thursday. Which you'll have about a month to review that up until the scoping meeting, which is going to be held on April the 18th. April the 18th, which is again a period where you can provide comments on the scope of what the environmental analysis should or should not include. We'll of course respond to all of your comments. And that what you say, what we hear from that scoping meeting will be become part of the environmental review and provide the basis for the environmental impact statement. So again, we're looking at certification by the end of this year. And hopefully after about a 5 or 6 month public review period, looking at final passage and approval by mid-year 2025. So with that, maybe if we can go back to the last zoning slide, and then I'm happy to take any questions. Yeah, this one.
Eric, thank you. We have new members. Welcome. Rachel, new member, and who else? Kenny, too. So there are 3 new members joined us. Eric, thank you for that.
Not new, just arrived.
Just a really arrived. This is the member who asks me all the time.
He's not.
Oh, I know you said that. Questions, comments?
Yes, plenty, but
Yes, we do. We'll have questions. I know there will be some. I think that end of the table, Frank.
So just some initial comments. I know I've spoken with you in your community sessions. And you know that it was I who said, we need new neighbors in this neighborhood. So I'm very supportive of this plan. There are certain things that I just would hope that you can adjust in your language in the very definition of this neighborhood, at least with regards to the Northwest corridor. It is not sleepy, it is already vibrant. If you walk the streets at night, we have a lot of activity, especially when there's activity at Madison Square Garden. The streets are filled. So I understand what you're saying. With more residential use, we'll have more mid-block restaurants and stuff like that, which we are excited about the opportunity, but it's not a desolate area. With regard to public safety and social services, what is written on the presentation is social services are providing necessary resources, but more support is necessary or needed. Okay, the issue that we have in the Northwest corridor is that we have a significant concentration of existing social services. So we can't have this thing where the city's response to this becomes, well, let's add more social services there. Just case in point, within a half-block radius of my front door, I have a methadone clinic, a 100-bed shelter, a substance abuse outpatient program, mental health clubhouse, and a harm reduction center. That's 5 things within 1 block radius. And that is what is creating this ecosystem that's causing significant public safety issues. So if we could alter that sentence in the presentation and understand what is currently an issue here and what people were talking about, and they said, we need safety on our streets. It isn't, we want more physical services added. We want the services that are there to be accountable to us and well managed, and they're currently not. And yes, and fair share is something that you hear, especially the Garment District Alliance repeat over and over again, is that unless we adhere to the tenets of fair share per city charter, and unless we even codify what that means, we're going to continue in this endless cycle of adding services because there are real estate opportunities, and because there's this perceived notion from city agencies that the problems that we have on our street is because we don't have enough services. So I feel take every opportunity to say that publicly to know that, especially for DCP.
So yeah, well taken. I appreciate it. We've heard it a lot. I do agree that that verbiage can probably be massaged a little bit. I think when we refer to additional support, we're talking about additional resources so that we can take troubled people off the streets, make sure that the streets are clean, making sure that there's sufficient, police on the streets to be able to, address the type of antisocial behavior that you just described, not necessarily locating more.
Well, I will tell you though that one of the proposed approaches that was proposed by a city agency was, can we put a motor home that offers services and mobile unit in the neighborhood? We're like, no, that is not what we need here. We have all of these physical services here, and they're just for them on average. That's why we want to know where. So, you know, that's just, so again, it's sort of, we need to massage the language and make sure that we're not making, contributing to the situation. And, you know, we'd be happy to work on it with you. Maybe a bunch of other questions, but do we want to?
Yeah, I'll come back to you. Anybody else want to?
Do a follow up on social services.
Sorry. Right, this is not a comment about social services, so, but, anyways, overall, I think this is a great idea. It is like so many people who know nothing about land use in general have told me. Like, it's so silly, we have all these offices in Midtown that are empty or half empty, and could be much needed homes. But I love the idea. I guess my question is, what can you do from the city level to make it more feasible to convert buildings where they cannot, like the bar is too high for the entire building, to be converted to residential? I know that will be one factor there, is just like if the state does their cap, then that kind of changes that calculus. But I think even so, even with a higher cap of like 15 or something, there are some buildings that are going to be much higher than. And how can we? I know there are lots of challenges with that. How can the city make it more viable and common for some of those large buildings to convert at least a substantial part to residential?
Yeah, so great questions. When it comes to overbuilt buildings and converting to residential, there's actually some debate about this, but currently our perspective, our interpretation of the regulations and the law is that if the building was constructed prior to 1977, you can convert 100% of the residential.
It's been done throughout the city.
Excuse me?
It's been done throughout the city.
Yeah, it has. So that's not necessarily an issue here because, like I said, the vast majority of buildings were built prior to 1977. So we don't foresee there being a problem with converting 100% of the floor area to residential. There are a lot of physical constraints when it comes to converting purpose-built manufacturing or offices to residential. You know, you need adequate floor plates, adequate light and air, there are zoning regulations, fire codes, building codes. The part that we can control, the zoning resolution. So currently you're about to see one of our citywide proposals, City of Yes for Housing Opportunity, which is proposing to allow relaxed office to residential conversion rules applied throughout more areas of the city. So currently, only certain areas of Midtown and Lower Manhattan are eligible for these relaxed residential bulk rules. With the passage of City of Yes for Housing Opportunity, we hope to expand that citywide. The good thing about what we're proposing is that for paired districts, so mixed use MX districts, we don't even have to wait for City of Yes for Housing Opportunity. You can already take advantage of those relaxed residential conversion rules with an MX district. So that'll apply automatically with these paired districts.
Thank you, Andrew. Joe?
You know, first of all, social services, and that issue is, we want to make sure that, for example, our neighborhood is full of social services, but also supported housing provider limits, right? We've given you maps. Have you seen all of our maps? So the idea of creating more social service type use here is not our goals for housing. It's a balance of housing for all different levels of incomes for families on the affordable side and market rate housing mix. We want to make that message very clear. Second thing is on Sanford's the question, and it is a unique opportunity we have here. Conversions are allowed of existing buildings. So that means with this proposal going through, we will see many more housing units it really constrained is that certain lower floors can't be converted to housing because the floor plates are just too deep and they don't work for light and air ventilation, even with the relaxation stuff, right? So please, no, not even the possibility. So, that's the second thing, but I want to talk to you about the bulk issues, right? First, in our briefing we had, can you please talk about, give us a prior starting back on this, a map of what's overbuilt, so we understand the built environment and what those FARs are. You've done that before, maybe they're and underbuilt, yes, yeah, both overbuilt and underbuilt, so we get a good idea of how it's going to be affected. The second thing is the west side of 8th Avenue. Yes. In our district, that you proposed 15 FAR. We have no 15 FAR map at all. Our maximum is 12 FAR. And we know that the existing bulk is higher, so that's great. But the moment you map something to 15, anything that is less is at risk of demolition. We would propose, we talked about this internally, to a mapping of 13 FAR, which says a new building would have 12 FAR mapped with today's rules, and then 1 FAR or week on the ground floor. We don't want to push demolition of existing buildings in this balance back and forth. That's all. The last piece that I bring to you that the board has taken a position on, I don't know, 10 years so far, it's a building at 300 West 38th Street. That building has been noted as being landmark eligible. It is by Emery Roth, who designed the El Dorado, the San Remo hotel out there. It is unbelievably an Art Nouveau Egyptian revival. You can't make that up if you try. It's only a 3-story building. It's a former actors hotel, and an entire large loft building is built around it. I every person from the community will look at it. It's remarkable that it survived at this point. And as we go through the process of the actual ULURP, that building, have you ready to be landmark eligible by the landmark commission? It should be landmarked as a remnant of a very different period of time. So just to have you think about that.
No, absolutely. And as part of this process, we, are meeting and conferring with all of our sibling agencies on a regular basis, including Landmarks Preservation Commission. They've already shared with us a preliminary list of sites that they're looking to potentially calendar for individual landmarks. They don't see potential for historic districts necessarily, but there are candidates landmarks, and so we leave that up to them, and that'll be,
Our 14 we've done as part of Western Yard rezoning, Western Yard rezoning, Garment Center rezoning, and identified specific locations like the New York Hotel, a couple of the law buildings on the west side of that are built like 20 FAR, 23. So there's nothing about the landmarking in most of the cases is a diminishing of value or ability to convert. It's going to preserve some existing fabric as part of this.
Thank you, Joe. Good point. Can we go to Chris? Can you hear us, Chris?
Loud and clear. Thank you, JD. I'm just getting a little feedback from my audio, which means I need to speak softer. Okay. So Joe brought up most of my points regarding consideration for bulk and providing a more detailed map. This map really doesn't provide much information to the public, and doesn't provide much information to this board. So please, bring that forward to us as quickly as possible. It's been done in the past. Secondly, my concerns are about historic preservation of buildings. Joe had brought that up as well. And then thirdly, another note for Brian and a note for everybody on community board is that WeWork is a real estate company, and WeWork has a large portfolio in this area, and they're actively seeking, because they went bankrupt, they're actively seeking to convert these buildings that they hold on to. And it was just recently reported that a WeWork on 36th Street, not that far away from Brian's, is potentially cited for shelter. So we're talking about an area that has the potential for continual citing of shelter space, and that's something that we need to be very conscious of.
Thank you, Chris. Doris.
So just since Chris brought that up, and you mentioned that you're coordinating with other agencies, we have found over the last few years a lack of communication from many agencies, particularly in the issues of housing prices. If you are still trying to put this through and don't have your pulse on what the city might be trying to do for temporary and permanent shelters, that may really alter some of those projections that you have for the number of units of housing we can create. Joe touched on it, the sensitivity around the 15 FAR and what door that opens. You have repeatedly in your presentation spoke about your hope, your aspiration that the cap gets lifted. I do think you'll find that a number of folks of this community do not share that hope and that aspiration. Density does not solve all problems, particularly when you're talking about the lack of fair share. Why does all of that density have to be in this area? And does that really solve, based on the projection that you have, of a growth in workforce? Would that workforce be particularly a workforce that would choose to live in the city? Or are they actually folks that may actually choose to live in the burbs and become unit? I don't know if that's part of your analysis, but either way, your presentation leans very heavily into this aspiration of lifting the cap. I'm hoping that you're conscious that that may not sit well with all communities.
And on location especially.
Can I call for a question? We will be over. You have more questions? I just have one question. Okay. So before that, I'm curious of Board 5. This is more about Board 5. Get correct. What's their response so far?
We did have a briefing with the leadership of CB5 a couple of weeks ago. I wasn't on that meeting. I do know that in general, CB5, just by virtue of having a CBD in their district, that they are generally more amenable to higher densities. That's just sort of the general vibe.
Yeah, they were generally supportive at that briefing. We had a few environmental sort of questions and concerns that we meeting like looking down or things, but in general.
So put the big buildings from their district. Just to follow up on something, the manufacturing, the uses, does it permit adult use?
Technically, adult uses can only be cited in M1 districts in the city, I believe. Maybe the lawyers would correct me. But yeah, it requires a separate approval unless it already exists. That's my understanding. We can get back to you a bit more. Sorry. Yeah.
And to follow up on Dolores' point, the jobs in the environment district, those folks are not going to be able to afford to live there, are they?
I mean, through this proposal with mandatory inclusionary housing, between 20 and 30% of the units are going to have to be permanently affordable.
That includes a set aside for homeless, which is a low in terms of the AMI that independent homeless is on.
It depends on the program, but some buildings will have extremely low income potentially.
But every inclusionary group set aside homeless now.
Not necessarily.
Really?
I don't know.
Totally different from the problem.
Okay. No, so there are two main options for MIH. The first is 25% set aside at 80% of AMI, or 30% of floor area set aside at, no, reverse that, 25% at 60% AMI, or 30% at 80% of area median income. So those are average AMIs, and within that, some units could be much lower than 80 AMI.
Any of the options, they might now has changed a bit. So we're going to pretty much assume the majority will all be one way or the other below 80. Correct?
Yes.
And we will get there. Just let me finish with the committee. Brian.
I just want to go back to what Dolores raised, also what Joe was talking about, that they are. One thing that on the sessions that I attended, I heard from the public and from my boss Block Association, that one of the things that people love most about this area, next to accessibility to the rest of the city, is the physical built environment. And when you talk about lifting that residential in FAR above 12, there's no doubt that we will start losing the manufacturing loft buildings, which really sort of are unified throughout the district and define the district's aesthetic. And is there any way, because as you mentioned, there are many buildings that exceed FAR, and those buildings can be fully converted to residential, and that's great, and this is done all over the city. What are we going to do to preserve the built environment, to stimulate physical conversion of buildings, not just conversion of usage? Because otherwise, we're going to lose these buildings. And that's not something that a lot of people, the few thousand of us that live in this area, would necessarily support. Is there limitations that can be put on height involved? Because if you look between on the 300 blocks, which is not a part of the study area, where there are residential buildings that are at 12 FAR, like in the green, right? It is out of character with the loft buildings, even the massive loft buildings that have been converted to residential, right? What can we do to address that going forward? And that's a challenge for DCP.
Yeah, I think a big part of that is making sure the state reauthorizes 421G and 421A so that it makes financial sense for property owners and developers to actually convert their buildings. In the absence of that, I mean, I'll just be real with you. There's going to be some demolition. That's how it happens.
Right, but if you, for example, say there's a height restriction on the mid-block, you know, we're going to maintain street walls. They're both defined this way in the envelope. Something I believe Paul addressed in our sidebar conversation that might hinder that wanton demolition.
I think that we are very interested in instituting bulk regulations that mirror the loft context, so very high street walls, you know, sort of wedding cake setbacks. That's an option that exists already in your neck of the woods. Apart from that, we don't want to necessarily impose additional restrictions that's going to inhibit the development of those residential, particularly affordable residential units that we could create from this.
We step back from moving. Both the height controls, both controls we talk about, setback controls, right? The thing that you clearly not said, which has made the work in the blocks west of 9th Avenue, West Bay Avenue, between 35th and 39th Streets work, is that we have a height limit in the blocks, 250 feet. I don't know if the appropriate height limit would be for the other blocks, but you don't want to have skinny, tall towers. And that's the price you pay for getting affordable housing. So if someone has a 25-foot wide lot, aggregate some development rights for adjacent properties, they get to build a 400-foot mid-block tower. Is that what city planning is? Or is that what city development department is? I'm going to ask you to really look at this carefully with all of us for the overbuild maps, for the underbuild maps, to understand it, to avoid the unintended consequences. I can't believe the Department of City Planning, the capital planning is done all over our district on the west side and say, let's put a 400-foot building, 40 stories tall, mid-block, because someone just has that ability to do it. Is that what you really can see that the way the city moves forward? You can still get the bulk, but so I ask you these kind of questions to provide.
Yeah. I think, CB4 is a really diverse community board. You have very low slum townhouses in Chelsea, you have tenement walk-ups, and you have our giant high rises. And I think it's appropriate for this area of Midtown to allow for really dense, really tall development in the middle of the largest city in the world.
I didn't say that. I said the middle of the, I can stick on that.
It's a huge difference.
Moscow, an avenue site, this is a mid-block site where the entire urban environment and people are attracted to a resource that exists in this city with an identity. And your idea is to transform it, so it's live, more residential, work, great idea. Do you want at all to risk billionaires rolling to South Street? Is that in this plan? That, have that risk there?
I don't necessarily think there's that risk.
Oh, okay.
Well, could we work together to manage that risk?
You can, of course, propose whatever sort of restrictions or controls that you think is appropriate. We don't necessarily think that DCP's, the city's initial position should be to impose those sorts of caps at the beginning of the process. Obviously, this is a draft. There's going to be months and months and months of refinement, and we welcome those comments.
So we will work with our neighbors, our colleagues in CB5, our neighbors in Farnham, Lions. We are looking to have something here that everyone supports and has the funds of it. And it's these kind of odd responses that give pause in the process, because when you can figure out a way to get everyone together on we are today, that gets a successful conclusion. Thank you, Joe.
Yeah, can I just make one last comment?
Sure, and then
I think there are so many constraints on development that we did not necessarily want to put another arbitrary constraint that may impact the production of affordable housing.
if I hear that mantra one more time, being an affordable housing developer for decades, I will say enough already. We're building a city. It's not just about one street of anything. Okay?
So, I think you made a good point. Sam?
I guess I'd like to maybe push back on that a little bit. I think the challenge with in the best world, you get the same bulk, but you get it flattened out over the block. The challenge with height restrictions in this area is that there are many property owners, and getting them all to sell and redevelop at the same time, or even just to convert all of the existing buildings into residential at the same time is very challenging. Much more likely that you're going to see individual owners want to sell and then accumulate air rights from nearby buildings. So cumulatively, I think just over time, you're going to end up with much less development of residential if you make that requirement that it has to be evenly distributed over the block, as opposed to having some buildings.
Not at all.
Well, if you have a height limit, that limits how high you can build in a particular lot, limiting how much air rights can be bought from the neighboring lots. That means that either all of the lots have to be built together.
There wouldn't be airlines because there would be a limit, so there's nothing within itself.
Senator, if I have a 25-foot wide underbuilt four-story building, and I'm surrounded on three sides by buildings that are overbuilt, there's nothing to buy, to be tall, to be bulkier. However, I could make a deal with my overbuilt neighbor to go down the block and to get development rights moved to me. You are familiar with 55th and 9th in the coal. That building absorbed air rights almost down the entire block of 10th Avenue to get 18 stories in a district that you had a 6-story height limit except on the avenues. We've learned this through experience, that developers, at least know this, we always say are water to rock if they find a way to do something. And this is not about limiting development at all. It's about managing. We are a board that's so favor of dense managed development all the time. We do it, rezone dense. It's about these pencil sliver height things that in this incredible garden center, which people literally like, it's a rhapsody. One of the ways we have a height limit on between 8 and 9, we had a meeting with Farmers City Planning. We went back and forth with Andy's predecessors. And I said, have you ever been there and seen when the sun sets at night? It's like a rhapsody in England from Gershwin. As this thing looks at all the wedding cake stuff, right? and they actually bought it. I'm just saying, think about buying something similar that creates a balance. Never, but when you say there's so many constraints, the entire city is a constraint. When you build in Midtown, it's a constraint, period. It's horrific to do it. You're not gonna kill anybody, people will work with you. And the one thing I do know is that developers appreciate predictability. If you give them a clear set of instructions, they like that as opposed to getting into the PL approval lawsuits on 67th Street and aggregate developer rights. Predictability makes sense to lenders, to builders. We just put it out there, we can talk separately.
Well, thanks for the comment. So there's this false assumption that we can solve our housing crisis by creating density. When we get to the situation where in the mid block that we have these critical tall high towers, the high towers are going to be most likely market rate as much as possible because that's where they're going to make their money. So we're not necessarily solving that large universal product. Again, I think we can lean a little bit more into fair share and think about where else it's to be. But for your specific proposal, for this specific area, the conversion that we're talking about is appropriate, something that we've all expressed over the years that we all are looking to see more residential, but not doing the role of a planning agency to think about the impact across an entire community and across an entire city is shameful, honestly, because what you're saying is let the market determine what it's going to be, when you're not planning.
Thank you, Dolores. Chris, I see your hand has been waving there. Sorry.
Yeah, it's okay. It's okay. Look, I think this is a very disingenuous response coming from city planning, and I'm going to start with the setback. One, we already know what happens with setback in this community. They turn into hotels. Those hotels get turned into shelters. We start losing our city street wall. We lose our culture. We get areas where like high crime begins to concentrate. That's just a natural thing that happens in this area. It also happens in places like East New York. It happens in Brownsville. It happens in Bed-Stuy, where setbacks are proposed for quasi hotels and motels. And then all of a sudden things get transitioned over without the ULURP process and property gets changed. Second, it's also disingenuous your response that we can suggest restrictions in order to block housing. That's really it's really cruel to say that. I mean, if you want to take that PR position, go ahead. But I think that's something that you're saying in this particular meeting, because there are a number of individuals who represent developers in this meeting right now who the city does business with. And so you're not going to provide an answer, and you're not going to provide an opportunity for negotiation with this board and CB5 because you have people looking to do business with you right now in that area and in Hudson Yards as well. In fact, you even have an advertising agency of one of those development companies in this meeting right now. So you know people are watching. You know the people that talk directly to your bosses are watching. So you're going to say, you know what, the community board is out of step. Additionally, and thirdly and lastly, a lot of this talk about removing cap comes from organizations like Open New York who have complete disregard for historic preservation, building preservation, and culture of communities. This is like an incredible fallacy that you're throwing on us today, and it's something that allegedly that we have to just consume and deal with, and then what? It gets leaked to the press, and we're going to have to say, oh, we are for housing. Well, if you're for housing, then you're for lifting the cap. That's absolutely insane. Let's look at things 3, 4, 5 steps ahead, because we really have to. And you have the education and the capability within your office to do that. It doesn't just take this committee. Thank you.
Chris, you made your point. Very good. We've gone from the poetry of Joe, moonlight and everything to the conundrum that we are facing. So we've gone from A to B. I think we have people in the audience. I'm going to go to Katie and then Martin. Katie, welcome.
Hello, Katie Savage, resident of Hell's Kitchen. I have 2 questions. One, again, with like the FAR, that's been much discussed. I think one thing you can do, it seems that the slide with the zoning changes is a little bit misrepresented, because you're saying residential is FAR 12 unless there's state intervention, but you just said that buildings that are already built before 1977 that have a higher FAR can be 100% converted. So I think removing that from the slide is a better representation because you're making it seem like nothing can happen without the cap being lifted, but clearly it can. Further, what Brian said about Emerald Green, that building is 12 FAR.
Yeah.
That is a very tall building. So I don't know that, I've worked in the garment district for 15 years. I'm very familiar with the neighborhood, the context, the buildings and all of that. If that's what a 12 FAR building is, I don't know that we necessarily need to build more of those in this neighborhood, because we already have a lot of tall buildings. And what Joe was saying about the pencil skinny ones, if you go to 48th Street and 8th Avenue, you see this building that people call the razor blade building, because it's this giant thing that sticks out of nowhere and does not represent the rest of the neighborhood, so it's like an eyesore. Going back to garment district, how will this impact the manufacturing? Because the northwest section is where there are a lot of factories. And I know you said the garment district is not what it used to be, and I agree, but having worked in the garment district in the high-end market, this is where Oscar de la Renta, Ralph Lauren, Carolina Herrera, The Row, this is where high-end fashion is created. And this is not like sweatshop jobs. These are well-paid factories that are trying to not get priced out and close because their rents keep going up and they can't afford to stay here. But those factories need to be here for the fashion companies that are here. Fashion companies,
So
when
how-
they have runway shows,
Stay, is that your question, Katie?
how are you gonna save the manufacturing to make sure that the owners of the buildings aren't gonna go ahead and sell and try to convert everything? Because the way the buildings are constructed, they can support all that heavy machinery.
Good question, Katie. So that's an important consideration, right?
Yeah, so good questions. I think, with respect to garment production or manufacturing in general, this area has enjoyed preferential zoning for decades. And despite that preferential zoning, we've still seen a really, really precipitous decline in manufacturing. So that indicates to us that the problem is not necessarily the zoning, there's something larger going on. And we think that in order to address that problem, the answer is not going to be a zoning or a land use solution. It's going to require other more targeted interventions, whether that's subsidies from our partners at EDC or other types of programmatic solutions. It's not necessarily going to be a zoning solution. Zoning can do a lot. It can't do everything. It can't preserve an entire industry. We've tried just to the west. We've tried instituting non-residential preservation requirements. Those have largely not proved successful. And so we think it makes sense to take a different tack and go sort of a more incentive and programmatic route, which we're going to be discussing with our other sister agencies over the next couple of months. Talking about what a sort of package of solutions or help for those types of businesses might include. It'd also be just important to note that a lot of these old factories, the larger sort of more muscular loft warehouses and other buildings, they're not going to be suitable for conversion. And that's okay. We want to keep that. We want to be able to preserve that option for property owners who want to keep those buildings as manufacturing. With our proposal with the mixed use districts, they can still do that. They can still stay there, continue to operate, and continue to grow.
Thank you. It's an important point. Quickly, Katie, yes.
Yeah, in regards to what you said about subsidies, would it be possible to work with EDC and the Garment District Alliance to identify some of these manufacturers and potentially find a place to consolidate them more and give them opportunities to improve their factories, improve the spaces, and create a more modern hub for garment manufacturing in this zone in a consolidated space?
It actually was proposed as part of garment center rezoning back then, 2017, and never happened.
So can it happen now?
This is part of the mitigation.
It was part of the package of incentives that was approved. There was actually 20 million earmarked
Yes.
for acquisition of the building that EDC put out an RFP, I think 2 times they issued it, and they didn't receive any viable responses.
So that would be some developers that are interested in creating that. I mean, because you have a whole thing that went up in Sunset Park. I don't understand
Actually,
what's similar to that.
application so that we're moving for farm center and we're doing manufacturing preservation and everyone was spearheaded it. And the problem was is that the funds simply were not enough to compete with this market. Okay, there were actually organizations that, that did this stuff in the Navy Yard, like Sunset, they were active. The money was not sufficient. So maybe that gets revisited as part of this discussion and incentivize it so it will work.
And I think also making sure the factories are aware.
It just off on something Katie said and something you said about manufacturing. It's like, yes, there's been a decline in manufacturing. They're not making T-shirts and underwear in the garment district. We all know that. Katie's point, there's a certain level of skill and high-end labor that occurs within the garment district to this date, and I can see it out my window in the neighboring buildings. And I guess the concern that Katie's expressing is, to my understanding, this is an option to move forward with residential. It's not mandating that residential be imposed on this, but there really needs to be some sort of mitigation plan so we can retain that level of places, facilities for highly skilled labor, highly well-paid labor, and it also is a huge driver for workforce in the theater district just to the north of us. They heavily utilize our neighborhoods. And this pertains largely to the northwest quadrant.
It's a good point. It's all tied together. It's important to consider.
And I'll just note, like, we didn't have, we wanted to get to everyone's comments and questions tonight, so we didn't get into all of the, sort of roundtable outreach and tours that we actually took of garment district with existing garment district, businesses and sort of touring their spaces and understanding these concerns on the ground. So definitely something we've heard before from stakeholders, and we want to just affirm that, like, we were hearing this and continuing coordination.
That's great. I'm gonna go to Marnie and then to Christine. Marnie? And then to.
Actually, I'm gonna say, so we have lecture tenants here, and your plan, how does that accommodate, public housing tenants? Given the fact that Related here is going to demolish their buildings, and often when that happens, there's a lot of displacement. So they're very concerned about, the AMI. Can you be specific about the AMI? And what the, for a family of 3, I think the AMI, I don't know if it's here or like neighboring, neighborhoods like Chelsea, it's like $114,000. So people are gonna have to make that much in order to move into these like tall skinny buildings. But, you have a huge constituency, and also, night tenants is like, anywhere between 400,000 to 600,000 public housing tenants in the city. And in this area in Chelsea, it's like 6,000 people. So I'm sure they would like to, there's opportunities for them, because usually there are not. Just to be honest.
Thanks, Mark.
So, as part of any neighborhood planning process, we try and look for opportunities to locate 100% affordable housing, particularly very low and extremely low income affordable housing. That typically comes on sites that are city owned or can be acquired by the city very easily, very cheaply. There's not necessarily that opportunity that exists in these areas. So the affordable housing that will result will be through mandatory inclusionary housing, which will be at either 60 or 80% of AMI. And again, those are average AMIs. There are subsets, levels of median income.
Can you tell me what 60 or 80% of the AMI?
Sure.
In town is?
It's not my city.
It's city. Do you mean like conceptually what AMI is, or what the numbers?
The numbers, the ranges.
Exact one.
I don't know off the top of my head.
Is it affordable?
I think they stop.
Yeah.
Just
So
a,
Celine's like, after April, I want to hear them, their presentation.
just a quick thing. I want to thank city planning. How often we do that? Sorry. Oh, sorry.
For Marty. Marty, we'll get you that. Joe's looking it up.
Celine is actually.
I'm sorry, Christine has her hand up. I'm gonna call on her. And then we can, Christine, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I have a clarification. I missed a little bit of the beginning. Maybe you said that, but the increase of FAR would be dependent on whether people are building housing and affordable housing, right?
No,
Well, for residential, yes, so today the base FAR
the increase is
is,
about 12, I'm saying.
Christine, do you mean the 15 FAR proposal?
Yes.
So the M19A district that we're proposing for the north, the 15 FAR would apply to non-residential uses.
Okay. Well,
Because today the FAR cap only applies to residential uses.
but I think that this is a giant loophole. We're going to get hotels and different things, and why should we give an increase when we are trying to generate affordable housing? That increase in FAR should be absolutely linked to the generation of affordable housing and of residential. Existing manufacturing do not need an incentive, and they do not need a higher FAR in this whole area.
Yeah, I think, this is a very mixed use area. You have a lot of commercial. You have a lot of manufacturing. We want to make sure that this stays mixed use, that this stays an attractive market for commercial development, if a developer so chooses. And we think that matching the 15 FAR with what exists today is appropriate.
Yeah.
Say again.
Well, we certainly disagree.
Yeah, I think we're just around that now and negotiate it through, but I want to say thank you for something else entirely. All of our discussions and briefings, we brought up the area, not in this study area, between 8th and 9th, 35th to 39th streets. It has zoning text limitations over the same kind of building with the same exact stuff that don't allow residential conversion. You informed us just last week that text as part of the city of yes proposal for housing opportunity will be deleted. So that means the entire area will be treated the same. That was a big issue for us to make sure that conversion can happen, paired with an affordable component, that it can happen also west of a Dept. Thank you for that.
Well, we're here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry. Joe's going to speak.
Okay, so got a question. The units will be at 50 or 60% of AMI or low end. And that's for single person, 50% at 49,000, and for 60% single person, 59,000, and family of 3, 63,000, and family of 3, 60%, 76,000. So there's a range, but again, in certain developments, they may choose to have a broader range, meaning down to 40 or 30% for various financing reasons. So you could have units at 40, 30, even lower, 30, 80. So there's.
So you go, right?
Well, no, the thing about it is, we don't know.
But
And
it's
one of the,
chances are.
no, it's actually 30% of the building, so it's not nothing. And I think we need to get quantification as we've asked for on the overbuild and underbuild sites, and that'll help us understand as you get to your DIS,
But
how many units will be actually produced.
NIH is really an abysmal failure when it comes to.
It's not the.
Yeah, it's certainly
Joe, thank you for that, providing that information. Appreciate that. I think there are no more questions from
I just
committee.
have a point of question.
Yeah.
So the name is allowed to speak.
This is, of course.
Right, so are we as a committee, looking, because again, this is a presentation that hasn't gone through the certification yet, or even spoken yet. Are we looking to have an action here this evening?
Well, we haven't finished
Oh,
the
fine.
discussion, and Brian is gonna write the letter.
I'm not
Proposed.
I'll read it.
Okay. From the floor, so they got,
I don't have any questions about it.
okay, you have a question?
Scotty, the
Yes, pertaining to health.
This is,
Okay, you must be tired of seeing my face, but I'm not just a resident of Lancaster in Chelsea. I'm also a resident of this community. We are neighbors. We are close enough, and I have a history here in Hell's Kitchen. I love my home and I love my neighboring community, but I'm starting to become disillusioned. The communities that I've always known and loved, the hidden treasure that once was, have been starting to dissipate from my memories, from my heart. New York City, a playground for the rich. New York City, a playground for the rich. Chelsea being trampled and stomped on to appease the greedy. Glutinous monster, can you please stop it? Okay, New York City, a playground for the rich. Chelsea being trampled and stomped on to appease the greedy glutinous monster. The rich come here to play, but go home and relax elsewhere. In a tranquil place where they can't be reached. They will get tired and find a new place to play. Meanwhile, our homes will have been exploited and ruined. These communities in the CB4 district are primarily residential. Casinos are supposed to be a field trip, taking the Greyhound at Penn Station. A 2-hour ride to Atlantic City, returning hours later to relax in our homes. Related and other developers have already ruined Chelsea, plenty, with their tin can looking buildings. And they're making their way into Hell's Kitchen. We are being enclosed in, and a condition I've never had, claustrophobia, is starting to creep up on me. No open space, a racing, palpitating heart. I no longer have a view to meditate on. Nothing but buildings and buildings and buildings. Related, a billionaire. You have enough. Go away and leave us alone in our peace, in our home. You are not wanted here. Stop exploiting our community. No more high rises. Demolish everything in the housing yard and go away.
So, all right, thank you, hold on. A good point is raised about open space in this proposal. Is there any consideration of these thousands of new residents, where are they gonna go? Have you thought about that?
Yeah, so there are very few opportunities for new open space, just because how built out it is. But we are working really closely with DOT to improve the condition of the existing open space. Harold and Greeley Square in particular is something that we're very focused on. Improving the Broadway by supporting the Broadway Vision Plan. Those are all sort of separate and parallel initiatives that, you know, at the end of the day will complement this proposal.
We'd like to hear that. I think we need to bring back Amanda Bird.
Yes.
She hated those sliver buildings, so we should bring her back. So the plan.
I think she's on the GDA board, so she'll probably.
So can I make a motion on this?
In just a minute. So everybody has spoken, I think. We'll thank the committee, thank public, Joe.
I make a motion that we just send a
I'm not on topic.
We'll move on to the next one.
Yeah, you should speak up, yeah, that was the hand was coming up with it. A motion that we send a bullet list to DCP of concerns that have been raised here tonight. And those have been an issue of 15 Vale on the west side of 8th Avenue. The notion that we were requesting to get underbuilt and overbuilt map and understand it better. We to quantify that to us how many units we believe will be developed, the versions and the construction, that we appreciate the bulk and the setback and the street wall requirements as part of their design, but we really are questioning about no height limit. I should look at that carefully, see if you can achieve the same goal within the height limits. And then the issue of social services that Brian articulated, which is pulled out from the video, which we'll talk about some nice thing. Just as 8 points for you to consider as you're going down the thing, so we memorialize our concerns from tonight. into a letter, as opposed to any sort of position.
We have a second on that. You have any comment on that? All in favor of this, Judge, which one is saying? And I want to thank city planning. Was that unanimous?
No, Chris.
Chris said,
I would want to thank city planning for coming.
And really thank you for having me in person again.
yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Another presentation, you can speak on that. All right, thanks, everyone.
So thank you all. I'm going to turn this over to our co-chair, Paul Devlin, with the next.
Great. Next item on our agenda is the Western Rail Yards rezoning at Hudson Yards. I would like to remind everybody that the way we operate here is that we'll have a presentation from the developer, questions from the committee, comments from the public, and then a discussion by the committee of where we stand. So I'd ask everybody to please respect that process a little bit and allow us the opportunity to hear from everybody. I'm going to introduce Andrew Rosen, and then on the next item, Marnie, I just described this. There is going to be, listen, there's going to be a presentation, then there'll be committee questions, then we'll open up for public comment, then we'll have committee discussion. During public comment, you all can have the opportunity to speak. So, sorry, we do it by subject. Do it by subject. We have an agenda. So we're going to have a presentation.
People don't matter.
So we're gonna allow. So I'd like to introduce Andrew Rosen I'm related to introduce his team, and then we'll have a presentation.
1 minute for somebody.
Marty, it's not fair that you interrupt us all the time.
1 minute. 1 minute.
No, sorry. This is the way we do things all the time. It's the way we always do it. So let's proceed. No one's talking. So let's go ahead. Thank you. Hi. Hi, I'm Andy Rosen. Marnie, please let us respect the process. Thank you, Marnie. Marnie, please. Jesse, can you start the presentation? Yes. Thank you.
Yeah, they're all things. Okay, so hi, I'm Andy Rosen. I manage Hudson Yards for Related. Thanks for having us. We are here to talk about a couple things. First is an update on the process for our Western Yards project and where we stand in that. And then also just sort of update you on the design and planning and what we've got so far on that topic. So we'd like to share that with you and invite your questions. This is the start of our process, right? We're at the very beginning of a land use process here, right? Going through an environmental review. So we will have a scoping meeting toward the end of March on the 21st. Welcome your comments on the scope of our environmental review. And then we will have an environmental review, and we would expect to, get that completed toward the end of the summer, and then, move into the formal process from there. So that's the point where we're starting from here. My colleague or my partner from Wynn is also on the Zoom. I don't know, you may not have a chance to speak in, but Chris Gordon from Wynn is on there. So, Chris Gordon. Yeah, so we get a chance to speak if you're able to connect that. And so first, I wanted to show you, some of the design planning that we've been working on and sort of explain it, where we are with the plan. The first principle that we have going into this is that
when the Western Yard was rezoned in 2009, there were a number of commitments that we made to this community about what we would build there, right? And that included affordable housing, that included a public school, that included open space, and we are going to meet all those obligations that we agreed to back then. So we took those as a baseline for our proposal here. We have made some proposed changes. They are outside the scope of the physical building of the resort that we are working on, and so that's why we're going through ULURP, which is a little bit different than some of the other projects we're proposing for gaming licenses in the city, where they don't have the actions outside the building. So we have some actions outside the building, and that's the reason we're going through this process here. But we'll go for it. So next slide, yes, please. So here's a look at Hudson Yards, yesterday. This is now, some time ago, about 10, 12 years ago, with the rail yards as they were. And you're seeing, obviously, everybody knows, what we've built so far. And I think that, one of the points I want to make on this slide is that we are obviously very vested in making sure that what gets built on the Western Yards is to standard and character that will work well with this community, because we are one of the largest property owners in this area. So we'll go to the next, and this is a rendering on the next page. So just wait a second.
Keep going.
Well, I have the rendering on the next page. I want to show you guys. That's right. So this is rendering you guys out to see a little bit more about the design here. This is a rendering from the river of what can be, on the Western Yards here. We've got a park in the center, which we'll show you more about. It is the same amount of density that was previously zoned, so 5.7 million square feet across the 3-block parcel here. It is in 3 buildings instead of 6.
That's not.
So we'll get into it. This is one of the rendered design of what we have put together here. So
You're starting with what you proposed, and you show us what is approved.
yes, I'll get to that. We have those pages here as well. I just want to give you a sense of what we're doing. So if we look to the next page. This is a piece about the resort, and this resort would be 1,500 hotel rooms plus another 200 residential units, total 1,700 keys, and a gaming resort at the base, right? So gaming resort. So let's flip to the next page, please. A rendering from 11th Avenue, and you see how this connects from what was built already to the west, and now you're starting to see this park in the center. It's a 5.6 acre park. It's as big as Bryant Park, and there, the gaming resort on the north. There is a residential building and an office building on the south side. Temporary housing. This is a rendering from the river looking east, right back toward the rest of Hudson Yards, showing the resort as well as the park. And what that looks like. So we'll flip to the next, and we can go. Now this is 33rd Street. We'll talk a bit more about this. Is the access point, into this space. So from a planning perspective, Joe, which is what you were asking, this is the plan view of what we're proposing.
Okay, one second.
Sure.
What I object to is your comment modification is standard to show us what's approved, and then how the modification is changing.
We have that in here as well.
Right, but you are starting to this committee of the public. I said, this is the plan. No, this isn't.
This is our proposal. To be very clear.
Salesman. No, but it's not. It's a modification. Yeah, you're saying that's the modification. So I think it would behoove related, say, here's where you started, here's where the modification is. Which doesn't make any sense, probably even conceive or understand it, for those of us that have been around, yes, 10 years.
We'll flip back to the.
Joe.
We'll go back to the side now.
Yeah, let's go. Let's
get through and then speak.
Let's get through this fast, please, because we need context.
If your slides already have show what the approved is,
Can you
can
jump?
we fast forward to those slides and then please come back to
No
problem. And, stuff in your presentation.
This is time to go back to that page. This is actually a good page to refer to here. Okay, so the existing zoning you know, at the left side here, it shows 6 different building sites, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? And then we have a park in the center, but it is, you know, distributed around the building. So there's open space. It's slightly smaller than what we're proposing now, but it's basically the same amount of square footage of open space. So it's about
It's
half
not the same.
open space.
Please, can I ask everybody, can we please just let the developer do the presentation, then we'll ask the questions, and then we'll go to the public, and then we'll have our discussion, all right?
Well, let it be an honest presentation,
It's gonna
Paul.
take all night if we keep interrupting, so please.
Appreciate that.
Thank you.
And so the change that we're proposing here would be to take these 6 buildings, get the same amount of density, and convert it to 3 building units. That opens up space to allow for park space in the center that is contiguous and takes you from 11th Avenue all the way to the High Line and makes that an open space. So that's enabled, right, by having access off of 33rd Street, which is technically not possible in the current configuration of 33rd Street. We'll get to that as we go through some of the presentation here. But 33rd Street slopes down from 11th Avenue to the river right now. It doesn't allow for access over the rail yard. And this proposal changes that to elevate that street to the same level as 11th Avenue to provide that access, remove the roads that are in the center of the plan here, and allow for that open space to be contiguous. So. To the next page, yes, thank you. So this is a render view of that park space with 3 different buildings as proposed. And this is a comparison on an axial view of the existing zoning on the left to the proposal on the right. This is the same total amount of square footage, the previous zoning, the existing zoning, 10 FAR with up to 8 of either residential or commercial. We're proposing 10 FAR, same amount of density with the 2 FAR of residential on the south, and then office building on the south as well. And being restored on. So that's the comparison of the prior to now.
Cindy, I'm sorry, I am confused. I thought you finished.
No, he's not finished.
No, I have one, but you know, I'm trying to.
Right, but you're actually not.
I'm just confused about the first slide, the approved plan, those buildings, those 6 buildings, were they all residential or what?
It was a mix, so the zoning allowed for both commercial or residential, allows currently for commercial or residential, minimum of 2 FAR of each, and a maximum of 8 FAR of each. So that's the existing zoning. The footprints were set up to really constrict that space to footprints that really work primarily for residential. That was the thought when the zoning was created in 2009. But the FAR and the use was always flexible to be commercial over residential.
But Randy, actually not quite accurate, because the entire plan for the Western Rail Yards was predominantly residential. And the footprints being their size meant that would deliver a residential building. And this community board and city planning spent a great deal of time with related on that. And one of the things you omitted, and I'll read in a moment from our resolution on Western Rail Yards, is we were concerned about not replicating the Eastern Rail Yards. We wanted to connect and restore the streets and the grid on the project. Right?
Sure, can I please just ask that, let's just get through what it's gonna present. I agree with what you're saying, but like, we gotta get through this. All right, so I agree, but let them go through it and then we can criticize the presentation. Okay, but let's get through it, please. There are people who want to speak and let's get through this.
There are a couple more slides and we should be done. Okay. So a picture of the existing rail yards, as I'm sure you're all very familiar. This is looking from 11th Avenue up to the river. Look to the next page, please. This is a view of 33rd Street as it stands today, right? Police cars are parked here. This road has been closed to the public for some time. The access is only for the city at this point. Look forward, please. Another view of 33rd Street looking north, looking east from 12th Avenue. And I think I just want to point out, you know, the great change here at 33rd and the proposal to go to the next page, please. Bringing that elevation higher to allow for access both at our site on the rail yards as well as the site to the north would allow for access there, removing the roads on the south side. We have allowed for a service entrance off of 12th Avenue to get to the marshalling yard, which is owned by the state. We also proposed that an elevator access that would take pedestrians on the street, down to the Highline level and then also down to the street level. So it's another connection point to the Highline that doesn't exist. This is a section showing, how that works. This is a little tricky to understand without some graphics. And then I think we can wrap there if you go back. There's a lot of things here you guys. So maybe go back to site plan. 2 pages back, please.
That one?
This is one back. Yes. Okay. I think this is a good place to start with questions.
All right.
Thank you for your time.
All right, I'd like to start for a second because I read through the draft scope and it has very different numbers than what you're presenting. And so I'm trying to understand why the Western Rail Yard's draft scope does not reflect what you're presenting to us now, where this is in the proposed action, it'd be the approved current zoning, this 5 million square feet of development. In the proposed plan, it's 6.2 million square feet of development. So why is that? Why is there a difference of what I'm reading versus what you're presenting?
The reason for that is that we're using stuff based on gross square footage, and I think Annie is talking about its own. So that.
We don't believe that.
Okay, all right. So I'm looking at the gross square footage. All right. So I'm gonna start with Joe, because Joe's been chomping at the bit the most, and then Chris.
Sort of like,
Yeah, and then I'm gonna go to Chris.
So what I really want to know, it's important in our discussion on this, is not to rewrite what actually happened in the most recent history, right? There's a few things here that makes it helpful. That in the community's response back in 2009, which was accepted by the city of New York, city planning and city council, it noted that we want to reintroduce the street grid, breaking down the street super blocks, create individual development parcels with street frontages, and provide multiple access points and connections to the public open spaces, right? And we were very clear that everything must be, all the spaces must be signed and fully accessible to the public and balance street activity and open space use. We actually went so far to say, don't call these the north and the south streets, call them West 32nd Street and West 31st Streets. The whole goal was to integrate the Western Rail Yards, as Eastern had not been done, into the entire community. The idea of creating basically a driveway entrance into a casino by elevating 33rd does not accomplish that. Our city does have change in grade, things come up and down, and that's normal, but it was actually thought about. And more important, it was agreed to by the in this rezoning. And to say that it's the same FAR, that this zoning is so specific and clear about the size of the building footprints that it was about creating residential. The big debate in 2009 was not replicating Eastern Rail Yards on the Western Rail Yards, not having monumental commercial buildings, but having smaller scale, even though it's relative, residential buildings. So I want to say, let's put that into the discussion up front, because it is not just that. The open space was divided, so you should be clear, and I forgot all about this, it was divided into Hudson Lawn and Oakwood Park, Hudson Hill Park, central open space. Things go down toward the Highline, Hudson Woods and Hudson Yard Square. We didn't get this stuff up, you guys did, right? And city planning agreed, and we spent an incredible amount of time talking about light and air, the shadows being cast on the park, having the multiple buildings, so it's not just these massive towers, especially ones to the south. Please don't cry for a moment in this community, which has worked so solidly with related to such difficult zoning projects, to say that a massive commercial tower south of this park is not going to cause shadows on this park. The other thing, honestly, to promote more commercial space is to cannibalize the existing Midtown market. And it's not something that at this juncture in time even makes sense financially. This is solely driven by your desire to create a solid audience scheme. And that changed the entire design that related companies, the Department of City Planning, City Council spent literally, 4 years on or 3 years on. So I know why you want to do it, but we say to you flat out, I really, really important to say, you said you don't have the funds to get the platform. And it's been a very big challenge to the platform now. Maybe you work with this community to figure out a way that the state and city support getting that platform built in exchange for making more affordable housing in this location and not just. I mean, the idea that the only thing that's gonna get a platform built is a casino, and in order to move ahead, you must change an entire zoning agreement that was so finely tuned. You said in our briefing meeting that everything was very prescriptive. It wasn't prescriptive, it was what you agreed to in order to get the zoning approved. And now, times are gonna change, we're gonna be flexible. No problem about that at all. But the issue is that no funds get the platform built, the casino's not the solution, and throwing out the entire rezoning to create two monumental commercial buildings is really something that I thought about since our briefing, that like, this is over the top. You know, I mean, why would any developer ever want to make an agreement with the city of New York when they can just say, let's slow down? You know, it's at some point, not modify it, tweak it, change it, without understanding, you know, any of that kind of stuff. But you're taking this as from a residential program to a commercial program to facilitate a casino in one large central park, not we talk about many things integrated in the neighborhood. I've been thinking about this. So, I just put it back and use my colleagues there.
So Chris, your hand is up next. After Chris will be Dolores.
Thank you so much, Co-Chair. I appreciate that. And Joe, thank you so much for sharing everything that you reviewed there, because so much of what you said is aligned with what I reviewed from the original agreement, which provided over 4,000 apartments and 324 affordable apartments to less than 2,000 apartments total in an action, non-action requested by the presenter today. And I think I'm really concerned that, you know, from a public relations angle, the presenter is going to say, we're offering 20% affordable housing with this new action, non-action to city planning, and the old one only provides 5. No, the old one provides 4,000 units of housing, whether it's luxury or affordable, doesn't matter, because the presentation states across A, B, and C, across that menu, there's 324 units of affordable housing, regardless of the matter. Additionally, you're asking this community, which takes on a lot of of the city's transportation pains, to take on more cars, from 200 some odd cars to 750 parking spots, not including vehicular traffic. You've also said that you're creating a grand alley connecting Hudson Yards to the Western Rail Yards. Well, the reason why the Jets don't play in Hudson Yards is because that original plan, that Grand LA plan, had nothing to do with the quality of play from the Jets. I'm a Jets fan. They suck. It's because the plan didn't work for the long-term success and viability of those rail yards, Chelsea, and Hell's Kitchen. Lastly, but not leastly, you're not going to connect a Grand LA and say that you're giving the people public space, when really what you're doing is creating a commercial for wind. Okay, it doesn't work that way.
Thank you, Chris. I'm going to go to Dolores and then JD.
Joe already touched on the fact that there was a very, very thoughtful, agreed upon design for this entire area, and agreed upon by many parties, many stakeholders, folks that did not get everything that they wanted, but everybody got an agreement. And the main thing that I'm concerned about is just visually, when we take a look at what's built now, I mean, we have massive, massive buildings on the eastern side. And the whole idea of what Joe had already articulated was it stepped down. It brought everything back to an articulation to a community that does exist, and now exists even more. What this does is it seems haphazard. Everything seems to support this podium. And I know that unfortunately your presentation was disrupted, but we didn't look enough at the size of that podium. You mentioned we went from 6 buildings to 3 as if that's something that's good, but the size of that podium is massive. It is massive. Can you please tell us what the square footage of that is, and exactly if there's any size building within Manhattan that would be the same size as that podium?
So I don't know specifically about the buildings in Manhattan, but I believe our footprint's about 200,000 square feet. Maybe it's slightly larger than that. I can get you the details on what.
How many square feet is the proposed casino space?
So the resort itself, is total, the building is 2.5 million square feet. That includes the hotel, and the resort. So maybe Chris, if you're able to speak, maybe you could speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
My name is Chris Gordon. I'm the president of development for Wynn Resorts. So thank you for having us tonight. The podium contains several things. It contains the gaming floor. In total, that's a little over 200,000 square feet. So we try to keep the gaming floors between 5 and 10% of the building, so we can give you that breakdown of how the building fits. And then around the gaming floor, there's food and beverage and a little bit of retail, although we didn't add much retail because there's some great retail both in the neighborhoods and in the Hudson Yards. And then above that, there's a ballroom up on the top floor. So there's back of house and other things, but basically the podium is that. It's gaming, food and beverage, a little bit of retail, and a ballroom, and then the hotel tower goes above that. And we'd be happy to give you a detailed breakdown of all those spaces.
I'm gonna go to JD and then to Christine Berthet, and then I'm gonna make a couple comments on
I'm sorry, I'd like to go back to that original design because I'm not understanding what you're proposing exactly. Could you slide back to the one with the original and the new?
Yes.
Diagram? So in the original, there were 6 buildings, right? And you were saying those 6 buildings were mixed residential?
No.
No?
Yes.
I'm trying to understand, what were they?
There was one commercial site.
So those 6 buildings were primarily residential.
Those 6 buildings were noted as all residential. So there's one commercial site, if you look at all the documents.
Right.
The rest are residential sites.
Okay, so.
And then this,
Well, so just to be clear again, this is the site on the north side, which was envisioned to be an office building at the time, right? Again, these footprints are much smaller, but the zoning use was always 8 FAR, up to 8 FAR commercial. So we are not asking for a change to that.
well, can we say to you, yeah, that's the use, when the building footprint made you go residential. That's what your company said to us.
Yes.
So I guess what I'm trying to understand, they were residential supposedly, mostly, right? Those 6 buildings?
Yes.
Now, all the residential is just gonna be in that one building?
Right, so this building, the 1.2 million feet residential.
So I'm trying to understand, the residential is like a community spread out. Now it's all put in one building. And then there's 2 commercial buildings. So that's quite a change.
It is
That's an enormous change from the conception of a residential area to one that's primarily commercial. Am I wrong?
You're not, I mean, I guess I would just point to, what we're trying to do is move this from being a rail yard to a developed.
Got it, I understand.
So that's why.
I'm just trying to get in my mind that it was primarily, in my vision, a residential area, now it's primarily a commercial area. So that's a big change, correct? Secondly, what does resort mean? What does that mean?
Prostitution, gambling.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
Pizza.
It
doesn't matter. You're destroying the meeting.
Could you elaborate what a resort is?
Yeah, let
It's a
me
hotel,
take that one.
spa, what is it?
Sure.
There you go.
In the business, they're known as integrated resorts. And what that means is it has multiple things inside one building. So in this case, as I mentioned, it's got somewhere between 5 and 10% of the building is gaming, and then everything else around it all works together. So for example, a customer may come to the resort, stay in the hotel, go to dinner, go to do some shopping, go to the casino. So those are the different things inside the building. We call them resorts because most people go there as a destination for entertainment. Hotel is a big part of it. A lot of people will come to the hotel and not go to the casino. They may go to the Javits Center, they may go to the Garden, they may go to Broadway. But a lot of our customers in situations like this, some certainly go to gaming and a lot of them just do other things in the city.
Gotcha. So as I understand, it's a one community. You go there, it's not for the other community. So you've got this kind of world there, right?
No, it's
Just
open to
for
the public. I mean, you'll have a tremendous amount of people that come and go through all the different, access points. So it's not closed off to anybody except for underage people that aren't allowed to gamble.
Okay. Thank you.
So my my kind of questions, I read through the scope report and I looked at gross square footage, and I'm looking at the original plan, what's proposed, and then there's an alternative. Right? So I'm looking at those three scenarios to try to understand what we're actually going to see as the output of this action, right? So I look at, essentially the plan that was agreed upon was approximately 5 million square feet of development, gross, to respect your position.
I mean, 5.7 million of zoning square footage.
I'm taking the numbers from the scope report. The what?
They're equivalent in square footage, all, except that the no action that we're comparing the post action and the alternative scenario to is actually smaller, which is more conservative, because related felt that they couldn't reasonably say that they would build those 6 buildings by 2030 for all the reasons they've discussed.
Yeah, that's a separate topic I also want to touch upon, but so when I look at this and I see gross square footage, the current plan, the current no action plan, right now, I'll just define for the audience what that means in a second, is approximately 5 million square feet with approximately 2.5 million square feet of residential and 2.1 million square feet of office, and then some other uses to add up to that 5. And then the proposed action plan shows 6.2 million square feet with 1.2 million of residential, 2.1 million of office, and 2.6 million of gaming facility.
Okay, so the two plans that are equivalent in square footage are the proposed project and the alternative scenario.
Okay, I understand that.
It's smaller.
Correct. So that's critical to me, is that the no action. So for clarification for everybody, no action means the current plan that's in place that was agreed to in 2009, that was hammered out with the community, hammered out with related, is smaller than the proposed, you just said that, right? It's smaller.
It's smaller in 2030.
We're using something that is not what was approved. It is about half of what was.
It's not fully built. The intent was that by that point in time, it wouldn't be fully developed. And so there will be many more years before it would.
Can I do this one more time? Sure. Right, so please answer your question.
Sure.
You want to.
There's some folks on the line, at least don't know, so just, we can just.
I'm Elise Wagner, I'm a partner at Crane 11, and I'm land use council to related and.
So the question I'm going to try to frame is the plan that was approved in 2009, I want to know, not between the community related, between the city council and the mayor's office and related, signed by a deputy mayor, not us, that total, how many million square feet across?
The same amount as being proposed today.
That's not, so in other words, we're not getting any increment from the approved plan to the proposed plan. Those square footages are the same. That's what, in terms of how the presentation has to happen for environmental purposes, it creates an impression that the 1.2 million square feet increment. And I just want to say this, we may argue with you, but we're trying to get higher information on stuff, right?
Yep.
And I think the big change though, or the false up, which I'll pick up on again, is that the majority of square footage proposed at that point was residential. And today, the majority is commercial, of which the majority is a 2.6 million hotel and resort with 1,750 rooms. Our expectation in 2009 is always hard to be built, market rate, affordable, and there'd be a new permanent residential community on the Western Rail Yard. The Western Rail Yard built over time. So I think that's the vision difference here.
Right. Okay, so thank you. And that's the critical component for me. And also the concern I have is to talk about a 2030 build out. You can maybe accomplish that with a casino and commercial, but you're saying you can't do that with residential because of the incremental needs of underdevelopment, which I understand. But why not match the proposed action change to a condo plan build out to 2040? Why not have, your analysis go to 2040 as opposed to 2030? Why did you?
This was just a more conservative approach to the increment and the impact to the community. So we can talk about that, but that was the.
So that to me is of concern that we're looking at the timing of this wrong. You know, I think I'd like to see how condo development phase out, which is what the original, what's the current position, how that timing would work out in correlation to a timing comparison of building it out as commercial. And then I also want to take note that the alternative plan does take into consideration the fact that a casino may not happen here. Right, and one of the things we have talked about is if this zoning changes to go from a higher residential component to a higher commercial component, but now there's no casino, we're still now stuck with a higher commercial zone, which is in violation to what was agreed to in 2009, right? This discussion we've already had about the phase down of height, movement towards the river and creating a residential community. You're now asking us to rezone this for a commercial use with the understanding the casino is going to help fund this, but the casino isn't even guaranteed. And you may not get that because it's a whole nother process that we'll have to go through. So I'm trying to mix all this up and understand how you're approaching this. And then we as a board are going to have to comment on the scope. So I'm looking at the draft scope report and I'm going to have to come up with commentary on what's presented within the scope, but it's not really corresponding to what you've presented to us tonight. So that's my conundrum, right? Any other?
So I'm just trying to understand, because that was a big question I had, is there's an assumption in this plan that, and this is no comment on Wynn or casinos in New York, but this plan is hinging on your being granted a casino license. The big question I had was, what if? I think, Paul, you were kind of answering. This is the what if component. What if we agree to everything here, which doesn't seem to be the trajectory we're on, but what happens if after all that you do not get approval for a casino at this site? And then I had a smaller question regarding how does this plan change with the integration to the High Line, which was, but that looks like a second streets and the streets.
Yeah. So there's a lot to this proposal, a lot of different aspects to including that. So the first question that you asked, about commercial density and how this maps out in the long term. The gaming license process is totally separate, as you know. We are going through a ULURP process that will deal with the entirety of the site and is really agnostic to that decision making. Obviously, it has a big influence on our planning and what we're desiring here, right, in terms of an outcome for the development of the site. We think that's the best course. Obviously, there'll be different opinions on that, but there is a scenario contemplated that deals with that in the scope.
So just so I can understand, is that what you're looking for here is to change the agreed upon site plan, which is
the footprints and the setbacks and the buildings.
Well, just like put in simple terms, is you're looking for more commercial square footage than was originally agreed upon and less residential.
We are looking for larger footprint buildings, right, which translates into more commercial.
That's the weird part. I can say this over and over. Is the site plan, which was carefully negotiated for footprints of buildings, also included things like setbacks and height and things to make the whole site work. It was an urban planning discussion. What you're saying is, instead, just allow us to have very large footprints for very dense commercial buildings and aggregate the majority of the FAR into those two footprints. And therefore, we extend the eastern rail yard into the western rail yard as a two-building major commercial complex. And if in fact there is no casino, that's what still will happen. Two large commercial buildings probably make it figure differently again. So why would that be an option after spending so much time with the city of New York and related, to come up with something to try to integrate the Western Rail Yard as a huge new community component, would that be an attractive ask to come to a community?
I think the answer is it's been 15 years and obviously the market has adjusted and changed. We've learned a lot from what we've built on the east. And, this is a plan that we believe, can move forward and deliver some of the things that we want to deliver, right? We want to deliver the parkland. We want to deliver the housing, affordable housing, and we want to deliver the school and all the things that are contemplated there. Now, there are other pieces to that plan. They are, adjusted in this, and we'll have to talk about that. We're at the start of the process here. We're engaged, we're here to present and explain this, and it's gonna be a very long process to get through all that, so we're here to talk about it.
But you result basically in an ability to build 2 large commercial buildings when parts of our city today, right today, are struggling with maintaining commercial districts. Why would we want to promote yet more dense, not even dense, super dense commercial construction that will compete with those areas? We know we need the residential, and that's one of the main things we talk about incessantly.
So I'm gonna call on Christine and Chris, and then I'm gonna. Would you let me finish? And then I'm gonna call on public to speak, and then I'm gonna come back to committee because we have an actual action we have to take, and I'd like to get through the details of that action. All right, so Christine, and then Chris, and then public.
Yes.
Christine.
Yes, good evening. So, I mean, I worked on the 2009 rezoning with Joe. I still remember that. And so, it was supposed to be 6.2 million square foot. I'm reading the city planning, and you could have had up to 5,762 units of residential on 3 buildings. And, that's what we expected in a sense. Changing that to, I mean, everybody has said what had to be said about the switch. I don't think what the city needs, I mean, there is what related needs and what the resorts need, but what the city needs and our neighborhood needs is more apartment and more affordable apartment. So that's the base discussion, is what are we going to get on that? The second thing is that these 2 platforms are really kind of, encroaching in the park. And I know they are not encroaching in a square foot way, but in a visual way. They are encroaching just like the shed is encroaching and the vessel is encroaching. These are 2 things which are really overwhelming, and it makes the rest of the space much less interesting. There was a point about the resorts. I mean, the objective of a resort in this business is to keep your customers inside all the time, captive, and keep them inside. So the benefit to New York City is questionable. And let me finish my thoughts. And so I think a resort, just like casino, they are going to do anything they can to keep you inside and keep you captive. So those 2 functions there do not yield a lot of benefit to the city nor to the neighborhood. And finally, such a large hotel, a large casino, whatever, is going to have a lot of effect on the traffic. And if there is something in this neighborhood we don't need, is more traffic. There is no stadium today because there was a major traffic issue, and that's going to be not as much as a stadium, but it is going to be a very big traffic. So these are my comments. I mean, I don't need any answer, but I hope the committee is going to take them in consideration.
Thank you, Christine. Chris?
Yeah, so Christine brought up a really good point. I know I blasted off on why there isn't a stadium in that Grand LA, but it connects directly with what Christine just said. There's still going to be some form of live sports entertainment in a resort. And, there's a great product that Wynn puts on in Las Vegas, and I've actually enjoyed it in the past, but like, we're still talking about bringing live sports to Hudson Yards, and that was something that was kiboshed in 2009. Secondly and lastly, in this 2009 agreement, you're still obligated to create 324 units of permanently affordable housing, right? We just came off a conversation where city planning was telling us that they want to create more diverse zoning for more housing in the area that is the Garment District and Chelsea and South Hell's Kitchen. We are now, as Joe said, once again, looking to create nearly a wholly commercial district against the core principles that were agreed upon, which was to have a majority residential district. 5,000 units of housing, once again, is incredibly important regardless. One of my biggest concerns is that with this tower proposed in either non-action and action from the presentee, is that the luxury housing would actually be in the control of the Wynn Resort and not related.
That's not the case.
Hyatt does the same thing, and so it is a business model that does exist. What I'm saying is that we don't want housing that is the production of a gaming entertainment company. It's so.
It's a separate building, Chris. It's a separate building.
No. I know it's a separate building. I know it's a separate building. I reviewed it. What I'm saying is that any luxury or market rate housing can be the production of a partner. It's not going to be like a related property. It's in conjunction with. And so what we're going to be having is affordable housing within one tower that is in conjunction potentially with a gaming company, and that's not good.
And Wynn's not a partner in that building. We have nothing to do with that building.
Because the resort building is separate from the residential building.
I know that. Paul, I know that.
All right. Well, the way you just described what you know sounded differently to some of us.
Paul, they can be joined together at any point in time.
On the same parcel. Two quick questions, Andy. City planning, what's your take on this proposal?
So I would leave it to city planning to weigh in. I don't know. Some they're not, they were here earlier, but I think you should ask them directly. We've been coordinating, and we are moving forward with the scope and the environmental review, in conjunction with.
So they have essentially said, go ahead.
I'm not going to speak for them.
Okay, what about your other developers in the area? There's some big other operators. Are they happy about this or unhappy?
I mean, we have talked to a number of. Well, of course we care. We've talked to a number of folks, through the process of engaging, people over the last few months as we've been putting these plans together. Obviously, there's a lot more to that process going forward. We do have people who are supportive, absolutely. We have people supporting the jobs that we're going to create, both during construction and on a permanent basis, and the economic.
I'm talking about several developers so around.
I mean, if you look around the city, there are a number of developers proposing, gaming resorts. So everybody's got a different take on it based on those incentives, I would say.
All right. Sure. What I'd like to do now is open up for public comment. And then once public comment closes, I'll come back to committee and we'll have committee discuss the issues that we have to discuss. So come up, please, introduce yourself. And you'll be given the opportunity to speak.
2 minutes.
Are we gonna speak there? I want to know, considering over 50% of commercial buildings in this city are empty, and related to all those commercial buildings, are probably going to bankruptcy, because they're all going to have to refinance at 7%. Why would you propose building a new commercial building when 50% are empty?
So our buildings at Hudson Yards have seen very strong demand.
There was an article in Curb 6 months ago that said why nobody wants to live in Hudson Yards, and it's empty.
Our buildings are largely full and,
They're full.
You have to respond, you need to speak.
What percentage?
You don't get those questions.
No, what percentage?
You don't get those questions, you speak.
You can make your commentary, but we're not. But you can talk about, you still have a minute left if you want to.
Well, yesterday at City Hall, Greg Morris of the West Side Jobs Coalition does not realize success in life is a stable home. Okay, far from throwing citizens in the market rate housing that these guys want to give us, which only has an average tenancy in the United States of 2.5 years in an apartment. In a house, you rent it at 3.5 years. These guys are human traffickers. Okay, Botcher at 153, botchingly propagandizing the false narrative of a relatively low number of evictions in the Rat Pack program. Meanwhile, Ocean Bay Nightclub, who was taken over by Wavecraft Management, had the highest number of evictions of any New York City building in 1 year, 2019. Okay, meanwhile, the nightclub jumped to the perjured himself again by claiming that that was over a 10-year period. I mean, the program only started in 2012 under Obama. Okay, nightclub executives at 156. Said there's no anti-displacement language in the Rat Pack contract. None. Okay. Sean Campion gives false testimony that NYCHA residents live with some of the worst housing conditions, spreading the narrative propaganda as in any building that our buildings are not good. Our buildings are better. Come to my apartment. I have a studio. I'm a single person. It will be better than 90% of the housing in the city.
Thank you.
Seriously.
Appreciate your time.
We need to keep our loans.
Like to speak?
No, I'd like an extra minute.
No, I'm sorry, sir. We have a lot
We've
of.
been shutting this down for 12 months.
That's not true.
That's true.
It's absolutely true. I have to record it. I have to journalize.
That we have other people who would like to speak, and I'd like to open it up for others, please. Alexa, please come up. That's quite all right. And please do me a favor for everybody else. Please introduce yourself so that everybody knows.
And I've been doing night since 1969 when I was 16 years old, and I had to raise help for my family. I had to work for my family, and I had to do a lot of struggling. Like I don't have money, but I'm glad I helped my family. And this community night is for low-income people, and I believe Section 9. No offense as it's related, but Section 9 is better for us. For the low-income people and for the lower income. I worked and I pay my taxes, and I lived here a long time, and I'm a good citizen, and I don't feel that I have to be taken out of my community. When I lived here over 50-something years for the low-income people in my neighborhood, so that you guys can make investments on casinos and on medium rent, which will be like $5,000 that a lot of people are not able to afford. A lot of the low income, you're only thinking about yourself. The world is all ours, the poor, the rich, whatever. We live in this world and we need to accommodate everybody. It's not only you that want to make money. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I saw another hand back here. Gentlemen, please come up and introduce yourself. Yeah, so you can be close to the microphone so people online can hear you too. That's fine. Right, that's good.
I'm John Mudd with Midtown South Community Council, and we know it's a big club. We've got the Granado who wants to build river commercial district. You got the Penn Station getting tied into the development. You want to downsize the nitrogen housing to just a smaller footprint. You want to take over that. You want to build casinos. We've got history. We've got plenty of history with casinos. Okay, you can look to Atlantic City. And you know, it's a big club and we're not invited. You wanna extract that well. But I think it's really appalling that you even consider taking away any housing whatsoever. We've got 50% of the rent burden, okay? Seriously rent burden people here. We got 20% up on the homelessness, okay? Your development causes homelessness. That's why we have homelessness. Over decades and decades, we've had this problem, and we haven't been able to resolve it. But 44 billion, you throw out all these numbers, and we can't take care of homelessness. I guarantee you, if you took care of the homelessness problem, build housing, and take people's stress away, elderly people, grandmothers, people that's worked all their lives, that made a home here in the city. If you had, when people are incarcerated, they spend money, then you got a city that's being built. You got a city that's got its own humanity. What you're doing, you're extracting all the profits, and I get it. It's a profit motive machine, and you're connected with the city really tightly. And I know ESD have no clue about what development is. Okay, if you have any idea of what development is, you would be building from the ground up and making it very useful for everyone. So people can live, prosper, and put back money into the system. Okay, you got people living so tightly, living on bread lines. I bring food in from upstate to feed elderly people. They're lined up, grabbing bags of greens. Okay,
Thank you,
and they're living on Social Security. This is, you're doing your development ideas, okay? It hasn't changed, and it needs to change.
Thank you, John.
Cannibals.
Anybody else from the public interested in speaking? Katie and Celine, okay?
Yeah.
Again, can you please introduce yourself for us? Thank you.
Miranda, I live in the LA building in Nightshore in Chelsea. Yes, we are near the coast, but this is not the beach. We are not Coney Island. What you're proposing, squeezing a light into the Western Railroad Yard, is ridiculous and a sign of greed. It's a land grab and exploitation of the community and the residents. New York City, the Big Apple, we no longer are. This is a dirty, rotten apple. You're pushing away the very people that make New York City unique, one of a kind. Please, relate it. We don't want you here. You are not wanted here. Go away. You are buying your way into our community. You may think that you own the land that you purchased and that you are entitled to more land, but you will never be a true New Yorker. Your heart is not here. You will never make a name for yourself here. You will always be known as the greedy intruder. I promise you that. The greed is obvious and embarrassing. You have no ethics, no principles. Stop making it worse for yourself. Stop buying people off. Make it easy for yourself. Go away. And please stop saying affordable housing to justify your greed. So, solution to housing crisis, start filling up the empty apartments in our NYCHA building and the other empty apartments outside of NYCHA. There are plenty of them.
Thank you, sir.
Related socks.
Caesar. Katie. 14. And please introduce yourself.
Well, Katie Savage, resident of South Kitchen. I just want to say that I'm very thankful that Community Board 4 has members who were around in 2009 when this plan was discussed. If not, they would probably just say, okay, great, sure, do whatever you want. I think if the city were to approve this modification, it would be a direct slap in the face in the need of housing. We're talking about changing from 5 buildings of housing to 1 building of housing, from more square footage of housing to less square footage of housing. And this is exactly, again, what the city is saying they want to do. And you're going to create buildings that in the future will never be able to be converted to housing. So if the city and the state, as Joe mentioned, could find a way to help you build the platform so that you can actually build the much needed housing we need, it would be so much better. And the concept of, wanting to shift all this stuff just because now all of a sudden there's a casino plan is kind of ridiculous. And the fact that you've dragged your feet so long on building the residential component Well, you've already done all the commercial and now you have the residential. Having the residential might actually make Hell's Kitchen residents not hate Hudson Yards. Universally, Hell's Kitchen hates Hudson Yards. I lived on 36th and 9th Avenue when Hudson Yards was built. The new owners of my little walked up, bought it out, kicked everyone out, got renovated, turned 1 bedroom to 2 bedrooms and doubled their rent because they can say they're Hudson Yards. And we don't need more of that. We need housing.
Anybody else in the public want to speak? All right. Anybody online? Would you, anybody online, who's in attendance who wants to speak in public, if you raise your hand, Jesse can move you over. Not seeing any, we're gonna move back to committee discussion then, please. And so, the issue we have before us though, is that we have a scope, a draft scope, and there's a comment period and the clock on this is running. So, despite the fact that this is March 21st. I think it's 10 days after the 21st, March 31st. March 31st, 10 days after the public meeting on the scope, it was March 21st.
The deadline is actually, because it's business day, you just figure this out. It's actually the day after.
So, all right, so it's the day after a full board.
We're okay in terms of timing,
but crunch time.
You clarify the release here.
21st.
The scope here.
And the reason why I ask that is one is you're asking for us to discuss for comment, but there is going to be a scoping hearing that happens before.
Yes.
Yes.
So maybe you have to.
So yes, so there was a scoping hearing on March 21st. The comment period closes 10 days after that, which is the day after our full board. So what I'd like to come out of this committee is comments on the draft scope, so we can pass it at full board, so we can submit it on time to say that.
But don't we have the ability to at least put something on the record, go here?
Well, I will say you guys did draft a letter.
Did that before?
I remember last year we drafted a letter on this topic, but in sort of broad generalities, like want to keep the original plan, the 2009 plan. So you're on record. So if someone wanted to send somebody to that scoping hearing.
I mean, scoping area in general.
Just volunteer. No, I agree. No, but I think that, so if the board has a position on a previous thing, but also I think I could probably testify as co-chair of Hell's Kitchen Land Use to say this is what Hell's Kitchen Land Use has said, even if full board hasn't voted yet. So
we have
that
full response in.
we'll put the full response in, yeah, right?
Thank you for clarifying.
All right.
And I think this is our third environmental impact response, like
In a 1 month. Right.
But
So I do want to walk through that process quickly, but you had a question earlier about the ULURP itself. Did you feel clarified on where we stand on that?
It's not about clarification. Again, I think this is just philosophy. This stems from in 2009, there was the culmination of an extreme amount of negotiation and understanding of everyone's needs and people coming to a point of agreement. Yes, times have changed. We all acknowledge that. Economics have changed, but I think it's a little tone deaf in many ways that we're looking at a process, a city process that is in good faith, that can be thrown out entirely. And we continue to see more of this in the last few years, where we're looking to protect certain interests, and we can agree upon something and balance them. It's a keyword, balance them, but it's arbitrary. And that arbitrary means that absolutely nothing that we negotiate is safe and has any ability to continue on for other generations that are going to be moving into this area, growing in this area.
I think that we're feeling sort of a consensus amongst this committee that the frustration level of an agreed upon plan that's now essentially being thrown out. So that could very well be the introduction of our letter, right? We can, a lot of times we discuss, is this scope even valid? Right? Should we even be discussing this and going through the details of this when it's such an abomination that our plan of 2009 is being chucked out the window? So we can, to deny unless sort of situation that we use for BLP or approval conditions like we do for LPC, we can have that be an introductory paragraph, but I think we do need to go through the scope in detail and give our feedback on this. And so I'd like to, this is my list that I wrote from my going through this, and then a whole bunch of other things too. So we can either go around and have input, or do you want me to start with mine? Start with mine. All right. Well, we already talked a little bit about the 2030 timeline versus a more developable timeline for looking at what a condo timeline would be like, because excuse me, John, Marnie, please, Marnie, it's very difficult to hear with voices echoing in the background. Thank you. So the the timeline for condo development on the existing plan. All right, we have a zoning in place. It's a timeline to do that. I think that the scope should reflect that timeline and then put the commercial components into it within that timeline, instead of reverse engineering it and saying we can only get to 5 million square feet of the current plan by 2030. So I'd like to see a revision of that timeline. Generally speaking, I think a 1/4 mile radius of any scope of a development of this magnitude is inappropriate. 1/2 mile radius should be the minimum. If you think about Moynihan Hall, where the people are coming from Long Island Railroad and New Jersey Transit into this site, I think that's a 1/2 mile distance. So, but I'm saying to the impact region is not a 1/4 mile, it's a 1/2 mile. And the other major component I see is that looking at a 100-year floodplain is no longer viable. The secret manual was written in a time when 100-year floods were not common. We're seeing 100-year floods every year now. So we need to be studying 500 years, not 100 years. So those are the overall parameters. I looked at what you have as the no action plan, which is 5 million square feet. I'm now hearing that that's actually the no action plan is 6.2 million square feet. I think that analysis needs to be more detailed, because within this draft scope, it shows different numbers. And I don't think that's a realistic analysis then to look at the no action plan is less than the action plan and the alternative plan. So I think that we need to revise that to make this a more robust study. I'm glad to see that there is an alternative plan for no casino, because the casino process is a whole different process. And if this rezoning occurs, we now have a high density commercial zone with no casino, but we're still stuck with the commercial without the missing residential. I think that we need to look at again, the numbers that are in the scope show 3,500 residential units in the no action plan. I think that we need to have a better understanding of what 5,700 dwelling units, which is what I'm now understanding was the plan from 2009. So what that plan is versus the reduction in the number of, this is the big thing I have, is that we're proposing putting in more commercial and putting in a casino and eliminating approximately 2,000 dwelling units. So I want more clarity on that.
And forward to that, there was a commitment for a certain number of affordable units, 2024, but related its entire portfolio pretty much passed. They build a rental building, they use tax exempt bonds, which require a 20% or 30% affordability portion.
Right.
So we were going to yield, end of the day, more than just the 324. And I want to note that as part of this.
Okay, so that's also important. I think that within some of the more details of the scope, within the proposed action proposal, it doesn't list the LIRR underground systems. You have in the alternative plan, but not in the proposed plan, you list specific underground issues. I think if we look at a 1/2 mile radius, we need to revisit the subway analysis of the 41st Street station on the 7 line, which is now non-existent, but it's a part of our community that we need. On page 4, you have a list of the specific zoning attacks. I think we need to understand what exactly is going to change, not just that it's going to change, but what that implication means. I think I'd like to see more open space definition, which includes more green space, not just open space. We count the shed and the vessel as open space, and right now the vessel is not open. So it's not really open space. So I think we need to revisit how that is defined and how we look forward at green space. And I want to see more covenants, right? A lot of things we've experienced in Hudson Yards is the open space gets encroached upon with additional cafes, restaurants, things like that, and constantly squeezing the open. Fire lanes are suddenly being built. That's not really open space when it's a car lane. So I want to have more covenants on the definition of open space. I'd like to see more on the timeline on the residential development. We're going back to this. The impact on other special districts, I think we need, you don't specifically list the Hudson Yards Special District, but I also want to include the impact on the Garment Center Special District. Joe's earlier point about cannibalism of commercial space and the conversation we had earlier tonight about Midtown South mixed use and the lack of commercial space, the vacancy rates, what's the vacancy rates here? How does that integrate? And what's going to happen to the Garment Center when more commercial is built? It says in here that there's no impact on public safety and infrastructure. I can't imagine that adding 6 million square feet of office space doesn't have an impact on public safety. So I think that no impact statement needs to change, and we have to have more analysis on public safety. The review of open green space is dependent on weekdays, and I think that majority of people use green open space on weekends. So I think that needs to change. The shadow reports need to include impact on the space within this development site, but also within the rest and remaining part of the Bella Abzu Park. I'd like to see analysis of the sight lines from the High Line to the Empire State. I think that's an iconic viewpoint, and how we did this with station redevelopment, looking from Moynihan and through Midtown West development, and how you see the Empire State. I think we need to do more analysis on that. I'd like to see some proposals for revisions to runoff versus wastewater treatment. So the systems you build when the rains come, how that's treated, and versus how sewage is treated, and have different sort of systems in place. I'd like to see more creation of renewable energy on site. Within traffic, you don't talk about the M11 and M12 buses, you talk about the M23 and M34s, but M11 and M12 are important bus lines. I think that if we have the opportunity now, and putting a platform over Long Island Railroad, you talk about ventilation from those trains. I think we need to have air filtration on that, not just ventilation, so that we can improve our air quality in our neighborhood. And I think on neighborhood character analysis, we really need to look at the demand for housing. I mean, to say that this doesn't have an impact, this has an impact. And the character of this neighborhood is about residential, and we need to really analyze that a lot better. So I knew that was just a laundry list of things. I just wanted to say it so it's on record. We'll put it in a more formal letter, but that's my initial round reading of the scope.
Thank you very much.
That was very well done.
So, any others?
Couple small things. I mean, I think that one of the things that we've recognized, any of these areas with massive developments, the wind tunnels that they create and some of the impact that that wind has had. In particular, we saw some really scary things this very week. And this will only potentially increase that. That needs to be looked at and understand how that also impacts any open green space in its use. If you have wind shear effect, you can actually really use for plan or whatever all that thing. And there's a mention of proximity to other national national registry. It mentions the Highline, et cetera. There's not a lot of explanation about what that impact is directly to what's there now and what will be in the future. It's just things like that that I think that also need to be added. I think you've already brought up a question about how this impacts the Highline.
All right.
And I see it mentioned in the plan in some places, but not with a lot of depth.
Okay. Let's go with Brian.
No, I was just saying,
Deliberation. I don't see what you, Joe.
no.
Piggyback on something that you said about the analysis of possibly doing analysis of 10th Avenue and the Lincoln Tunnel and the impacts that this casino will have on traffic. 10th Avenue is already in there, and an impact on surrounding businesses, because there is a lot of businesses after COVID that just have not fully recovered, and a lot of them are in Hudson Yards. So I'm just curious on building this, what impact is it going to have on some of those commercial spaces? And then the other thing that I had, I think you mentioned about the air quality for the trains underneath and how that would be.
Can I ask a question on that? So when you talk about impact on businesses, two components that I would think that aren't being discussed for analytical work is the commercial towers themselves, but then the impact the casino itself would have on it.
Well,
the
casino inside is having extra businesses like other restaurants and clothing stores and whatnot, which is already offered at Hudson Yards. Is that going to be taking away from those businesses that are existing, which already seem to be struggling since the pandemic? So I think it's not just the casino aspect, it's the other businesses inside that I think is something I think should, how much more business is gonna bring? Is this casino gonna be able to support itself and not take away from other businesses?
My concern is with an opening statement. This is extremely troubling because it is a loss of faith, it's a loss of trust. How can we trust what you're saying? How can we trust that you don't have the money to build a platform? We have, can we see why? I mean, we have any of that evidence? You're just saying this. The fact that you're going against the agreement just like that betrays a certain lack of trust for me. With what is going on. Are you agreeing with me or disagreeing? I don't understand.
I agree.
I just want to, our opening statement, the Lord's proposed needs to be very strong to state the facts.
I mean, we knew that sort of related to. Did relate to see when we had stimulus money, there was a whole discussion about trying to get that in the budget, to get the platform built with that, right? There was, there's a lot, there's related, tried a lot of different ways to get a platform built. So we always want to encourage you to keep on trying to get a platform built. Because we're at a nexus now, government city state, and maybe, do something.
And the bonds are producing from the Eastern Railroad.
That's right. So we'll continue with this.
Yes, all right. So let's continue around. Sanford, anything?
No, I think you covered it all.
Anything from the P&E? Just want to, hold on one second, please. Bob, you want to make a statement?
No, I'm not allowed to say anything. I'm present but not eligible because I run the Hudson Yards Health Kitchen Alliance and related to some board.
Okay, I see Chris's hand up. Chris, anything you want to add to the analysis of the scope?
The analysis, I don't understand why we're even considering the proposed changes in zoning that's being requested. I'm not even sure this committee or community board is allowed to vote against the best interest of the community. So I think we're at a legal nexus right now where we need to find out through the Manhattan community, through the Manhattan Borough president, whether or not we can actually vote on approving anything with notes like this, because it was this 2009 agreement was already done in good faith. I would ask Jesse whether or not we're allowed to vote on something that removes housing that was originally agreed upon from the community.
Thanks, Chris. Joe.
Yeah, Joe. Had this issue with government actors saying that there was not a willing support at all of the proposed plan, but we have a legal document in front of us proposed, and we have to opine. And Chris, in this case, I think we're coming to the finding that there's a basic underlying problem here that is not consistent with that implementation. It doesn't mean that any private owner can't propose something. But if they propose, we've got to respond and not just say, oh, tweak it or fix it. We can also say it doesn't work. So we can do that.
Yeah, I just don't think that we should say tweak or fix. And so the at the crux of it, what's being proposed is tweak or fix. And I think that we just should be voting this down outright. It's just.
What's in front of us is the scope of work, not the ULEZ.
Right. So just to remind everybody, this is the draft scope. So we comment on the draft scope, they produce the final scope, then they start to do their research, and they do their analysis. Then they come to us with a draft environmental impact study. We then comment on that again and say, you didn't do this methodology, this, everything is perfect, and we approve it, whatever we want to say. Then there's a final EIS, and then from there we move into the ULO process.
Okay, so then to that point, hold on, in continuation, to that point for consideration, should we not get studies on on-site gambling in proximity to residential? Hell's Kitchen has had its history with OTB and quality of life on the 9th Avenue corridor. What should we consider how gambling would be affected, would rather affect residential areas, specifically this residential building? Well, I can't really hear. I'm getting so much feedback.
All right, so Chris, people in the room are in agreement that perhaps we should find a way to request as part of the analysis of the proposed plan that includes a 250,000 square foot casino, what the impact of a casino on a residential community is, and that part of the analysis is to understand what that impact is. And so we can include that in our request, to include that in the scope.
Yeah.
So just to clarify, because Chris, you sparked in my brain just to clarify, what we're trying to do here is to provide comments that then are part of record for the scoping hearing.
Yeah, correct.
Okay.
Done.
So do you need a motion?
Yeah, the other thing I just want to add is that like all of these scope and draft EIS reports and all, Waterfront Parks will be looking at the environment waterfront issues, and traffic, Transpo will look at traffic and come up with feedback to add in to what we've incorporated here. So those committees will also add some commentary to our letter.
Great.
Okay? Any other?
Can I make a motion?
Except they have not heard the presentation.
But how do they watch it? And they have.
Mark's gets it tomorrow.
And Christine was here as chair for our presentation, the Transpo, and I have already committed to go to WPE tomorrow night.
I'll tell them all about what it was like in transportation, I promise. I won't let them miss any juicy details.
They'll have a question.
I'm concerned about us taking on the job of presenting later.
They can watch the presentation. And then, like we've done with all others,
So can I move that whole detail list plus our conversation tonight be embodied in this scoping much review full board with the heavy duty free.
Is there a second? I see a motion and a second. Everybody in favor of the motion?
Aye.
All right. Anybody opposed? Anybody present not eligible? Thank you. All right, then, motion passes. All right. Thank you very much for being here tonight. Thanks for being here tonight. Thank you for being here tonight. We have one more item on our agenda. Sanford and Rachel's gone. So just a quick discussion on the outstanding issues on demolition by neglect.
So is this discussion about the legislation for the Eric Botcher or about the update to our board website?
Yes.
Okay, for the update about the board website, I believe that was given to Joe for review for like accuracy and make sure the content was all good in there. Joe, you had a chance to look at that?
I finished working on the EIS.
So no was the answer.
Totally understandable.
1 minute for the room there,
Yeah.
so that the folks online can hear.
We don't need it on the that was one. Right?
Did I hear a motion to adjourn?
No, we have an issue. We have another issue to discuss. Chatter the swarm, babe. Okay, so the room is clear. Chatter the swarm. Let's move on to demolition by neglect discussion, please. Get a little focus, 5 minutes, less if we don't quickly.
Yeah.
Joe?
Yeah.
So the answer to the question is no.
Right.
All right.
But the answer to the question is next week, because actually,
Yes.
there's no more.
Unless they come up with a new EAF.
Time pressure. The executive committee, we noted that Councilmember Walker has proposed a new piece of legislation specifically to require two things. That the Department of Buildings, when someone applies to demolish in a special zoning district, that the Department of Buildings must have a third party review of that proposal. So they're not relying on the developer has submitted, and that they will notify the community board of that possible demolition. And I will note, JD sent me a photo today of 435 West 48th Street, in a building which is a 5-story masonry and joist, a 5-story masonry and joist building, which the Department of Buildings said they looked at. There was not a demolition issue. They were not removing more than 20% of the building. The photo today shows the new steel structure with all new corrugated steel plates for concrete. So the Department of Buildings again has failed us in this issue. So the two things here are first, that they will review it directly, not rely on the commission review. And the second one is give a community board review. This came up at the executive meeting. The issue was there's no time frame on the community board review. I think you should probably ask Mr. Foster, council member, to consider as it goes through the process of legislation. So give a 60-day or 45-day period for our comment. Otherwise, if it happens, we don't know about it. But we get a 5-day period. So yeah, that's anything. How do people think about that?
It makes sense. I mean, again, if you're looking for any sort of lever, we even had some responses on ways to provide more clarity to DOE that there's its own agency on how to identify where these may be issues. If there's legislation that helps with this, all for it, and time, providing that time period gives us another window of protection.
So should we actually take a vote to say we support this legislation? To have some input, so that we can, but then we can say, we can go to these hearings and say, Community Board 4 has taken a position in support of this. So coming out of this committee,
hasn't been introduced yet, it's probably introduced soon.
Should we take a stand now on the proposed link?
Yes.
Where should we wait?
I think it's okay. We don't have to specifically speak to it because we don't know what it is. But we can speak on the issue and we say that understanding there's an opportunity for legislation. We would like to support that, as well as to introduce the idea of a design.
So
when they apply, they need to inform us.
no, that when they apply, they will go to the commissioner's office, who has DOB itself review whether or not this is legit, and then also the commissioner's office will notify the affected community board
Before they sign off.
Correct. And if there's no, the issue is there's no time limit, how do we know? How do we know?
If they notify us and say, tomorrow it's gonna happen, that's not our time. So we want to introduce a time frame of a 30 to 60 day window.
We have in the demolition provisions in Hudson Yards, West Chelsea, Garment Center, 45-day period.
So my motion is actually to review that this has been an ongoing problem, to be supportive of potential legislation that further helps provide protections. And in addition to what we are understanding could be this proposed legislation, which we can find a letter, we would like to have a defined comment period that allows ample time for the community to respond to any of these potential issues.
Can I friendly amend to say that we insert a time of 45 days, similar to what we very specific.
Instead of just relying on something that's there, as far as
Yeah, you like to mirror the language that we have already in place in the 45 days. So just because if we say some time, it could be big.
So we get 45 days, and then what?
we know for the first time that there's a proposed demolition.
You said it needs to be and having to take a picture.
Yeah, instead of me walking by back at the building.
So that's
Maybe then we could take some action to stop
Yeah, right, but demolition, right, before, again, why do they have to? Not that they're going to.
It's the commissioner, it's not the applicant.
But the applicant is applying for a special district, he has to inform.
No, the applicant did not, they put a DOB, you know, the plans approved.
The legislation would propose that there would be, as soon as it's requested, that it doesn't get rubber stamped, that it doesn't.
A proposed demolition.
Proposed demolition.
It gets sent to the commissioner's office, and that's in the, I have a clerk. It's both. When we say demolition,
Right.
20% is covered.
But you understand,
It's all covered.
we didn't want to talk about finding the correct demolition, it's piecemeal, so.
So that's my motion.
Will there be a second on the motion?
Second.
Thank you.
Okay, all in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Survivors.
Anybody opposed?
Still aren't clear.
Anybody abstaining?
What?
It's just demolition.
No,
No.
anything that they mark that it has any demolition potential, like
Okay.
partial or whole range.
It's not just
No,
demolition.
not the whole building, but any.
Demolition is defined in the district as 20% on the floor.
So let's be clear.
Actually,
Gotcha.
Is that a yes?
Yes.
Okay.
All right, passes unanimously. Okay, I'd like to entertain another motion.
Motion to adjourn.